All right, wow. 46 years ago and some 30 pounds ago, on a big clay track in Bakersfield, California, God gave me a very, very special night. I mean, it was one of those nights, you know, I know I've got some runners here. When you finish a race, a lot of times you're all spent by the time you get to the finish line. I could actually count backwards from 10. I mean, I knew what my name was. I could talk to people. It was just one of those amazing nights. And I know it was a gift that God gave me. And I want to share a little bit of that with you. You met our daughter, Heather. I heard cousin Dean was up here running the DVDs, so I want to make sure you meet him. Daddy, can you say wave to everybody? Daddy, can you do the same thing? That's one of our daughters. Here's Justice. Justice is here. Walker, look, I'm going to Sadie back there. All right. Someone asked us why we're here. We're actually visiting with him. We've been here since, the 9th to 10th of December, and it's been a delightful time getting to know all of you and spending time with them here in Ramside. So let me share a little bit how it all started, because when you see something like this, it helps to have the perspective of what really took place. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. Anybody ever been to Wichita, Kansas? There's one brave soul. You know, there's not much in Wichita, Kansas. There is an Air Force base there, Connell. But I was one of those boys that grew up, and probably like some of you here, I was looking for identity. I wanted my life to be something. And Justice always tells me I have to tell this story, so this is a part of it. I grew up just wanting to be someone. In those days, my parents both worked, and I'd come home from school and the house would be empty. And in those days, it was the beginning of black and white television. I know for some of you that was unique to see black and white color, but it is a little dated. But I'd come home and I'd watch television, and the first thing I'd watch was the old Howdy Doody show. Anybody know what Howdy Doody was all about? You just go to Walmart or whatever it is here to buy the old Howdy Doody shows. But right after that came my favorite show. It was the black and white series of Superman. And the reason I liked Superman, you see, I was the grade school nerd. I was the guy that couldn't say things the right way, couldn't do things the right way. And he was this guy that flew around with a cape and rescued the pretty girls and captured the bank robbers. And who wouldn't want to be like Superman? So that was my first goal. That was my first hero, so to speak. So one day, after the show was over, I was going to be Superman #2. And to do this, I went into my mom's cupboard, my mom's cupboard. I got the tallest glass that she had, and I got in the refrigerator, and I got everything in the refrigerator that was in liquid form. I put it in the glass. It's a very secret formula. Milk, Coke, pickle juice, Tabasco sauce. Everything that was liquid in that refrigerator went into that glass. I had all the confidence in the world that when I would drink this, I would have the same power as Superman. So I went on the back steps of our porch. It had a little step like this, and on the back steps of our porch, and made sure none of the neighbors were watching, because if they knew where I was, it would just kind of kill the whole thing. So I took a drink of this stuff, and nothing seemed to happen. So I thought, probably I have to drink all of it. And at that moment, I wish I'd gotten a smaller glass. But I somehow got that all down. And now again, I checked to make sure none of the neighbors are watching. I didn't see anybody, so this time I put my hands up over my head. I'm ready for this explosion in my teeth that'll fly around the backyard, and since I've never flown before, I was a little concerned about that. So after a few moments of standing with my hands out in front, I discovered I wasn't going to be Superman #2. But that's where I was in my life. And I bet if you reflect back on your life at some point, you said to yourself, you want your life to be something, you want to amount to something. And so that's where I was. So the next thing I tried to do was I wanted to be involved in sports. I went out to the baseball team. And I had an interesting experience there. I went from the outfield to the infield to the bench. You see where this is going. And I got cut from the team, and it was the church baseball team. So it wasn't like, wow, this guy's got tremendous talent. So I, waited a little while longer, and finally I got into junior high, and I was tall for my age then. I had most of my height when I was a 7th grader. I was 6'1", and the basketball coach happened to be the gym coach. And so during the first day of time when they were getting ready for basketball, he said, "Why don't you come out for the basketball team?" Of course, I'm thinking, man, that's fantastic. How did he know that my dad had put a goal up over the garage? And I practiced lots of hours shooting and working on the layup to win the basketball game. I mean, this was just a great moment. And so I went for the team. About halfway through practice, the coach said, "I'd like to have a meeting with you in my office." And of course, I happen to have a lot of imagination. I thought, wow, I've been discovered. I'm going to be a famous, well-paid NBA basketball player. I'll have a big bank account, and man, I just couldn't wait till I get to that meeting with him after practice. So I went into his office, and he began with a question. And if you've had this, you know that this is not going the direction you want it to. He said, Jim, you should notice there's a difference in the way you play basketball and the way the other boys play. And I said, well, Coach, I know I'm kind of at the beginning stages. I'm going to get better, I'm sure. And he said, I'm sure you will. When you enter high school, try out for the team again, but when you finish today, take a shower and hang the signal on the door, and I'll see you back at the gym class. And that was my experience in basketball. I don't know what it was in my life. I was in church. I went to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night. Somehow I was determined that I wasn't going to let this be the end of my life. And so the only other thing in Wichita, Kansas in those days that was available for young guys, we didn't have football in those days. I don't think I would have made it as a football player. It was junior high track and field. So I went out for the junior high track and field team. Now, see, those first two experiences gave me a lot of rich experience in how to work with a coach. And I knew there was one coach in track and field in many different events. So I also noticed that when he would go to, let's say, to the hurdlers, after he talked to them, there were fewer hurdlers. So he was cutting the team. So naturally, I started as a hurdler, and when he got ready to cut the team, I became a pole vaulter. And when he got ready to cut the pole vaulters, then I became a sprinter. And somehow I stayed out for the junior high track and field team for 3 years. I never made the team, but I never cut the team. So I felt really good about life at that point. Now, having said that, you see, even in those moments, I can look back at this and laugh now, and I can see how God has used this in my life. But it was difficult. It was challenging, because when you have those moments when the coach says, why don't you come back when you're in high school and try out for the team, you know, that's a moment of truth. Now, I'm grateful my parents raised me in a Christian church, because I would go to bed at night and I would say, Dear God, and I think I prayed this prayer almost every night, starting from when I got cut from the church baseball team. I go to bed and say, Dear God, I really want my life to be something, and I'd really like to do something in sports. So I would appreciate it if you could show up a little sooner than later, because right now it's not going well. And you know, that was a very innocent prayer. It was a very selfish prayer, but it was a prayer of, in a sense, desperation. And I bet you at some point you have, in one form or another, prayed a prayer like that, saying, Dear God, what's the plan for my life? So that's my prayer. I go to bed at night and pray that. Little did I know that when I would go from junior high to high school, I'd go out for a team, cross-country team, that was one of the best in the state. In fact, I didn't even know what cross-country was. How many of you run cross-country here? How many of you, if you raise your hands, you're brave. Okay, you run cross-country. Is it fun? Some of the time it's fun, right? No, I know. Okay, so having said that, see, I hadn't done any running up to that point in time. My longest race, our workout in junior high, the coach would come out on the dirt track, drag us foot across the track, and he'd say, okay, you guys are going to run a quarter mile a day. He'd shoot the gun and off we'd go. No warm-up, no workout. First 100 yards great. 200 was okay. By the time you got to the 300, you had too much lunch. By the time you got to the finish line, you just go over and lie down on the soft spring grass until all the hurt went away. So naturally, when I went into high school and I started running cross country, it was a shock to my system. In fact, the first day of practice, we met in front of the gym. We ran up to this little park, which I found out was a mile away. Never having run more than a quarter of a mile, that was oh boy, that was ouch. Got up to the park, ran a number of different drills the coach had designed for the team, and then I remember that it was sliding downhill back to the gym, took a shower home, Mom had dinner. I said, Mom, no dinner tonight, I'm going to bed, I'm tired. I woke up the next morning, and what happens when you've done too much running? I see it over here in the expression, ouch. Oh, that's exactly what happened. I couldn't get out of bed. I rolled out of bed, walked upstairs backwards, said, Mom, I'll be home early today, I'm not going out to the cross-country team. But you know, I'm grateful that I had some buddies who said, you're coming back out, aren't you? After 6 class periods, I went back out to the team. So, you know, life is not always easy. And in those challenges, you find out a lot more about yourself. And during those challenges, I began finding out more about myself, and eventually I find out that God had a plan for my life. So I went out for the cross-country team, and I went from last man on the team to leader on the junior varsity. And by the end of the season, I was the #1 man on the cross-country team. Hey, even got a letter jacket. And I thought there'd be a girlfriend right behind that. I was so excited, I found a little team. It was a fabulous experience. And it all happened at some point in your life when you tried really hard, and things went your way, and you had work and there were results. And I was so excited, I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. So then along came the track team, and I went out for the track team, and I found out my first meet, for example, went out for the first meet, and I really hadn't run any race any miles. I went up to one of the older guys on the team, I said, how do you run this race? He said, well, you wait till half a lap to go and you outsprint everybody else. And so there were 8 teams, 3 in a team, 24 on the starting line. And with half a lap to go, there were 2 of us, myself and another guy. And so I remember my trainer said, so I started sprinting. And he did the same thing. So here we are, the last 100 yards sprinting, get to the finish line. He's experienced, he leans at the finish line and wins. I stagger across at the same time. We have a time together that's equal. I'm past the finish line in the runner's pose, and we all know what that is. Hands on your knees. You're making those promises, oh, I'll never do this again, right? Or Alex, this really hurts. Well, my buddy ran up and said, who you lost? I said, yeah, the guy in the red and white jersey. He said, he's the state champion. We just lost just by a little bit to the state champion. And I thought, this isn't such a bad sport after all. Then one of the other ones ran up and said, what your time was? He said, you ran 20 seconds faster than what you ran 10 days ago. And I don't remember riding the school bus back to school, but that's how God got my attention. That's how running started for me. It was an amazing journey, and it's continued since through the years. I mean, I can share with you that, when I made my first Olympic team when I was a junior in high school. 18 months later, after not making anything, I was on an Olympic team. In fact, I went to my first Olympics in Tokyo in 1964, and I found out they held the Olympics every 4 years. Maybe I can come back again in another 4 years. I mean, it was so new and so incredible, the things that had happened. In fact, I could mention that it was actually ESPN that was the high school athlete of the century over LeBron James and Tiger Woods. It was an amazing journey. Now, having said that, with that success came that sense of, running was my God. I loved it, but at a certain point, it was disappointing me as well, because while it was giving me rewards, it was also leaving me empty, because I kept having to run faster, so that I could satisfy not only myself, but the media people. In fact, when I ran this race in 1967, the year before, I had run a world record of 51.3, and I happened to be, in that race, the first American to hold the world record since I got back in Kansas by the name of Glenn Cunningham. And so when the race was over, since I was the first American in almost 30 years, I was leaving the track after about 3 hours of interviews and questions and autographs. And up ran this real attractive girl in the reverend and said, oh, Jim, I have your autograph. And then the second thing she said, now let me explain to you, in Kansas there's 2 really great schools. The better of the 2 is the University of Kansas. And the other one is, I'm sorry, what was that other school?
At Kansas State University.
Kansas State University. So when she said Kansas State University, I ran a little faster. And we met on a blind date in 1967 Thanksgiving 1966, pardon. And I chased her, and it took a couple of years for her to realize it would be a great relationship. And we were married, and she's been a wonderful gift ever since then. We've had a wonderful relationship. But we started out together, too, wondering what life was all about. Because until you answer that question in your life, who is Jesus Christ and what this is all about, then there's an empty spot. So along the way, there were ups and downs. After I won a silver medal in 1968, which, anybody know what a silver medal is? Second place. Same size as a gold medal. Somehow they placed more emphasis on the gold than the silver. So when I returned to the United States, to my hometown newspaper, not just regular type, but like 3-inch type, said Ryan only gets second place. Only wins a silver medal. But you see, when times get tough, don't run from those times. Because that's when God was getting my attention. That running was wonderful, it was fun, there was more in life. And so we were married, and we struggled on for a while. Along came another Olympic year in 1972, and we were getting prepared for that. And I was having those mountain experiences and those Death Valley experiences in running. And by that I meant I was running at the top of the world, And then maybe 2 weeks later, I was running 4:19 at the bottom of the world when you're the world record holder. So I was having a difficult time. And yet along the way, God put in my life Christians. And I thought I knew what a Christian was because I'd gone to church all my life. But they had something that I didn't have. And that was a peace that I only experienced occasionally after a race. And on this race you just saw a moment ago, there was a certain peace because I knew I'd lived up to what I was supposed to do, that potential. But go away pretty quickly. But we met these Christians, and they were telling us all about what it was to be born again. You know, how unique. We've been in church all of our lives, and they had something we didn't have. So they began explaining to us what it was to really have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so May 18th, 1972, Ann and I met with some friends, and we invited Jesus Christ to come into our life. And I have to tell you that the most amazing thing happened. I don't know how to explain it either way, but it was almost like God touched me on the shoulder and said, you know, you never have to run fast again. I love you because I created you. See, after that point in time, I thought I had to earn that peace. That peace isn't something you earn, it's something God gives you when you get in a right relationship with Him. So on that night, we became Christians. Now that happened to precede the 1972 Olympics. And that plays into the story very important part because I came to the Munich Olympics, right? In fact, I was just back to the Olympic Stadium, what was it, 2 weeks ago, a week ago? Sunday, that was a week ago. And first time I'd been back to that track. And I wasn't sure how I would respond to it because it was on that track in 1972 as the favorite to win the Olympic gold medal. 500 meters to go, I get fouled by another runner, I fall, I hit my head on the railing, I get back up and I finish, but I'm not qualified for the next round of competition. In fact, somehow Ann had gotten out of the stands of all those people and gotten down to where the athletes' tunnel goes from the track, the competition track to the warm-up track. And how she got there, I don't know, because if you happen to remember a little bit of Munich 1972, there was a terrorist attack, and so security was incredibly tight. And somehow she got down there and met me in the tunnel as I'm coming off the track after having fallen. Because up in the stands, there were all kinds of military standing around with the guns, finger on the trigger. They weren't sure whether you were a good or bad guy. Anyway, she got there and we embraced each other and prayed, and all of a sudden the media was upon us, and you know, the coaches said you'll be reinstated. It was obvious you were fouled, and then everybody left. And there we were holding each other, and we prayed, and we knew that something had happened May 18, 1972, that we'd entered into a real relationship with Jesus Christ. And so we prayed, and we kept thinking, okay, God, where do we go from here? So we left the stadium, and just outside of the stadium, I don't know if any of you have been there, just outside of the stadium, there's a practice track, which is where you do your warm-ups before going into the competition track. But there's a little bit of a sports arena now. They've got an indoor track and all sorts of stuff. That was the location then for ABC Television's worldwide network at that point. They were broadcasting there back to the States. And so as we walked by, and I told Anna, I said, we got to find someone to help write a petition for reinstatement in the competition. And so as we walked by, I said, hey, I remember this guy we met with ABC Wide World of Sports. You remember him, Howard Cosell? Howard Cosell was a Monday night sports announcer, but he was also a very fine attorney. So he walked in and said, Howard, can you help us? And so he said, sit down, Jimmy. We'll write a petition and you'll be reinstated. And so we wrote out this petition and submitted it to the International Olympic Committee. Met with one of the officials the next day, and he said, you know, Jim, we've never reinstated anyone before. We're not sure you were fouled, but it never happened before, and you might as well think about coming back in 4 years and trying again. And I have to be honest with you, because I was a young Christian at that point, because it was, think about that in your life. What is something you put all your heart and soul into? And then to have an unfortunate experience happen or fall, and then to have someone say to you, hey, come back some other time, don't worry about it. What would be your response? Well, my response was I wanted to reach out and grab that guy by his tie and beat on him a little bit. But by the grace of God, it didn't happen. And that was where our Christian life began, frankly. Because we had to determine that we were going to trust Jesus to help us through these years to come. And it took time because forgiveness is one of those things that's hard because when you have an anger towards someone, a lot of times you don't realize it's still there or that it's even there. So that's why we went back to Munich State. And the first time I'd been back since 1972, I wasn't sure what response I'd have. And it was a sweet response. Bittersweet, but a sweet response, and knowing that that was the moment when we had decided we wanted to walk with the Lord. And it was not the end of my running, but rather it was really the beginning of it, because I could run with peace, knowing that I didn't have to run fast to please anyone or to earn anyone's favor. And so I share that with you tonight in the sense of, you know, you may have that moment in your life where you're wondering, gee, what's life all about? And you can have that peace by answering that question in your life, who is Jesus Christ? And do you want to invite him into your life? I know it made a huge difference in our life, it made a huge difference in our children's lives, and I know that our lives have never been the same since then. Would I have loved to have won the Olympic gold medal? You bet. I would have been the first American since 1908. Instead, I think I'm one of 5 Americans to win a silver medal. Honored to have that, because I remember that young boy growing up in Wichita, Kansas, who, you know, cut from the church baseball team, couldn't make the junior high basketball team, wasn't successful making the junior high track and field team, but he would go to bed at night and say, "Dear God, you've got a plan for my life. I appreciate it to show up sooner than later." And boy, did he show up. And so I'm grateful you came tonight, had a little chance to listen. Maybe if there's a question, if somebody has a question, I'm more than happy to answer. If you have any kind of a question of those. I know we've got some treats back there. Yes, ask away.
How did you train? What kinds of things did you eat? Because diet's so different for athletes and more specialized today. Or did you not worry about it?
That's a very good question. What did I eat? And what kind of training did we do? Now, first of all, we knew very little about eating in those days. And so we ate everything that came our way. Now, part of it is because I was a young guy, but also because we were running. My first year of training in high school, we ran about 60 miles a week. The next year was 100 miles a week, and the next year was 120 miles a week. This is in high school. So you could pretty much consume anything you wanted to eat. Now, I will tell you one thing that was not a part of our diet, that's very much a part of diets now for most young people, is pop. We didn't have access to, I mean, if you had a Coke, it was a unique experience. You know, we just didn't have a lot of that. So mostly what I had was meat, potatoes, and vegetables, just good meals. I learned through the process of experience, we've all had this, not to eat too close to a race, though. You know, just foods didn't agree with me, so I just had to wait, 6 or 8 hours between my last meal before I ran. But in terms of training, my high school coach was a swimming coach who applied swimming principles to track and cross country. Now, by that I mean, if you know anything about swimming, how Justice does, you do repetitions, a lot of different repetitions. Excuse me, he would recommend that. We applied that to track. And so a lot of our workouts were done on a track. Now we know as a runner it's better to have the diversification of long, slow runs or intervals on the track or a distance run. But we did because we were in a downtown school, a large downtown school. My high school was a 3-year high school, 3,300 students. We had very few coaches, but a very large team out for the track team. So we did most of our work on the track. Probably out of a 7-day week, we were on the track 4 days a week. I wouldn't recommend that, but I was one of those guys that didn't break down as a result of it. So training was a lot different. There's a lot more to learn about. In fact, at the end, when we're all finished, Damon's going to put up our running camp that we do. We've been doing running camps for 40 years. We've had all kinds of talent levels that come. We've had the American record holder in the marathon, Ryan Hall, came when he was in high school. I attribute a lot of what he does now to that. His wife, Sarah, Jim Behringer Simpson. But we have camps in 3 different locations. Damon will put it up a little bit later. This is our Colorado camp. We have Dr. Daniels who comes, Dr. Jack Daniels who comes and works with them. So running has changed a lot. We know a lot more now than what we did then. We were experimenting in those days. Now you have, heart monitors and all sorts of things that help you in terms of your training to make you get there. So I hope that helps you a little bit. If you have a question. Anybody else have a question? Yes.
You ran, I know, all your high school on cinder dirt tracks, and I run a lot of races on cinder dirt tracks. And when you got to Tokyo, or when you started running, what kind of tracks did they have? Like nowadays, they have the very nice Mondo tracks. And how would that have played into what your records were?
Tokyo 1964 for the Olympics there was a cinder track. And it was actually Tokyo 1964. Tokyo should have been the Olympics for the 1940 Olympics. but something came up called World War II, and they didn't host it. So they were thrilled to have the Olympics, and they went all out in terms of showing their country to be friendly instead of warlike. But the track was centered, and it was interesting. It was held in late September, early October, and we had quite a bit of rain. But they were always down the track. As soon as the rain came, the track people were out cleaning it up and getting the water off and everything else. So it was a cinder track in those days. The first all-weather track was in Mexico City, 1968, at altitude. Of course, ever since then, it's been a synthetic surface. So in the early days, I know you're from Southern California. In the early days, the tracks we thought were the best were the ones in California who were called baked clay. And to tell you what a baked clay track is, it's a track which had a lot of clay on the surface of it, and they water it, flood it with water in the morning, and all day long it would dry out in the sun, so it become baked clay. Really great for a few races. But by the time they got to the mile, it was like sawdust. And yet it was still better than what we had in the Midwest and Kansas. In Kansas, when we ran in spikes, our spikes were about that long. You had to have long spikes to get by. In fact, my first time to go to California for a race, we ran on a baked clay track. And I remember I grew up delivering newspapers, and I had to buy my own equipment. The first pair of spikes were paid $16 for a pair of Adidas. And they did not have interchangeable spikes in those days. So when we went to the meet in California, the meet official saw my spikes and said, you got to go over to the machine shop and grind them down. And so all I could think was, it was my $16, on the floor, there were shreds of metal. I ran a couple of races in California, but that was it. We had to have short spikes in those days. Okay, anybody? Yes, yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about your,
I'm sorry, try me again.
talk about your time in Congress a little bit?
Sure.
Your years after.
My time in Congress, I had to mention that I served in Congress from 1996 to 2007, and so in 1996 I was helping carry the Olympic torch across Kansas. It was an Olympic year, and the representative in Wichita said, why don't you run for Congress? There's a seat that's open. And I'd always said two things I'd never do in my life. Never tell God you're not going to do something. Let me just give you a little hint ahead of time. Don't say you won't do this. One of them said I'd never coach. The second thing is I said I'd never run for public office. Well, in 1996, the opportunity came, and I went home and met the children, and we all talked about it, and they were real excited, and they said, Dad, you got to do this. So I went away for a couple of days and prayed and fasted, came back, and decided it was time to run. We talked to my parents and my parents, and then so we got ready, and so as soon as the decision was made, I heard some noise in the garage, and there was this piece of plywood, it was about 4 by 6, out in the garage. Heather's banging away, painting the sign, Ryun for Congress, so we put it up on the post on the road, and there we were ready to run for Congress. That's how it all started. Now, my purpose in going and running was that if people would give me the opportunity to represent them, I would. Having raced when I was in high school against the Soviet national team, the East German national team, and then seeing other socialist countries, I thought America's a great place. If I get a chance to contribute in some way, and that some way came in 1996. So I ran on a pro-family, low taxes, small government, basically conservative platform, which in the city of Topeka, which was part of my district, didn't go over very well. They wanted to have a lot of money. But the farmers in the country brought me home, and I had a chance to serve 5 terms in Congress. So that was it was a great privilege. Ann and I both felt that every 2 years it was a matter of, if God was going to put us back, we'll run hard 2 years and see what happens, see if we can make things better. Okay? Let me take one little story. I'll tell you a little story to that, because sometimes, when you hear about Congress, you don't realize all the things that go on. One of my committees was the Armed Services Committee, and one of my subcommittees was the Personnel Committee. And so the committee, the Armed Services Committee, asked me to handle the pro-life issues. And so one of the things that we worked on was continuing to protect doctors in the military, that they wouldn't have to perform abortions. And so that was my privilege for 10 years, and we never allowed it out. It would always go one step higher, but we always won the vote in terms of keeping military doctors from having to perform abortions when they wanted to be there to save lives. So to me, that was one of the great achievements that we had as an opportunity to work in Congress. Okay? Anyone else? I don't want to keep you too long. You get some desserts back there. Okay, another question. Here.
Could you speak to the difference in running equipment, specifically running shoes, but also like shorts and tops, And from what you ran back in the 60s and 70s primarily and what we have today, is there a big difference? Is it really helpful?
There actually is. Let me do this. I'll make this my last question. I'm happy to answer some more, but let me address that a little bit. My day when we ran, you had basically two shoe companies. One of them was Adidas, the other was Puma, and they were both made in this country, Germany. I think it's Herzegovina, I hate to say, I'm not sure how it's spelled, but in the city, the Dostler family, brothers, fought over who was going to be, one was Adidas and the other Puma. And in the city, as you go into the square, there was a bronze man standing there with children on both sides pulling. One side has Adidas shoes on, the other side has Puma shoes on. Now, the reason I share that with you is there weren't a lot of choices in those days. You had what we now, I doubt if anyone has anything here like that. Most of you have a synthetic upper. Ours were all leather uppers. So that meant that when you got a pair of shoes, you break them in, you could plan on blisters. So you would get 2 pair at a time, breaking them gradually so you get rid of as many blisters as possible, as early as possible. But they were not good compared to what we have now. Now you have some very conforming shoes. There's an explosion in terms of technology. Shorts are different too. They were mostly cotton. Now you have synthetic. It's much easier to run on the equipment you have today. It's just lighter in context. It's lighter in its how do I say, the fabrics that are available, but it's much easier for you to run on. There's the other part of equipment, I think, which were the spikes. The biggest thing, one of the biggest changes now is your surface on the tracks, and I'll end with this. I mentioned the bake plate tracks in California. Those were considered super tracks. Well, we didn't have interchangeable spikes. That's when you would basically begin with interchangeable spikes. Now you have interchangeable spikes, but you have all weather tracks, Mondo tracks. The only thing you guys that run now have a problem with is that you're on a hard surface all the time. The dirt tracks we ran on were very forgiving. And so, for example, if you put your spike into the track, your spike would, your leg would take a little bit of the torque, gradually progress up your leg, and it wouldn't cause as many leg problems. Now you have such a hard surface, it puts a lot of pressure on your tendons, on your joints, and so some of you are probably a little bit more slow. You've probably never experienced running on a dirt track before, but a dirt track is slower, far more forgiving, not as fast, but something that will help you in the future if you get a chance to run one. I would encourage you to do that. All right, let me finish with one last little thing, and I'll do this and then I'll wrap it up. I had a wonderful coach in high school. His name was Coach Timmons, and he was a guy who believed in goals. Now, he's since then become a Christian. After my 4th high school race, I had run a 4:21 mile that day, and we're riding the school bus back from Kansas City back to Wichita. And it's about a 3-hour bus ride, and nothing to do on those buses in those days. There were no TVs, no headsets. You just kind of slept on your buddy, and that was it. And so, he was a very forward-thinking, inspirational guy. And so he always saved a seat. For example, up here, let's say Justice was my coach. The seat was empty beside him, and he'd call all of us on the bus one by one up in front to come and sit with him. And he would talk with us. And so he would say things like this. This is the way he addressed me. He said, "Jim, you've run a really good race. When you have 100 guys out for the team, for the guy to know who you are," and this is only my 4th mile in high school, I thought, oh, that's good, he knows who I am. And he said, "Now you've run a really good race." And he said, "Now how fast do you think you can run?" Of course, I run a 4:21 mile, and I'm thinking, wow. I remember getting to the finish line, much like many of you, and I thought, that's it, can't run any faster because everything hurts. He said, "I think you can run faster." He said, "I want you to tell me what you think you can run." So I got real adventuresome, and I thought, well, maybe 4:19, which is only 2 seconds. He said, "No, Jim," he said, "I think you can be the school record holder." The school record was 4:08. I thought, wow, how do you go from 4:21 when you finish across that line, your legs hurt, your head hurts, your lungs hurt, I mean, you're just tired. He said, "I think you can run school record." I said, "Well, Coach, I appreciate that." He said, "I think you can do one more thing." I said, "What's that?" He said, Roger Bannister was the first man to run in 4 minutes. And I knew a little bit about that, and he said, "Now I think you could be the first high school boy to do that." This is after my 4th high school race. Wow, how is that possible? But that's one of the things we talk about in our camp, and that's one of the thoughts I want to leave with you. How big is the dream that God's giving you? Is it big, or is it in your comfort zone? Is it something you know you can accomplish, or is it something you would like to try and get out there and see that adventure? And I challenge you to do that. Ask God what He wants to do in your life. That one moment on that bus began transforming my life. I wouldn't even, I told you about my first Olympics, I didn't know they were every 4 years, I didn't know what it was all about, it was a whole new adventure. And so I leave that as a challenge and a thought for you. What is God? God has a plan for you. What is your plan? What is His plan? And I'll turn it back over to Toby. And I want to mention one last thing. I have some of my books, if you're interested. Unfortunately, they're printed and they're back in the States. However, if you're interested, I think Heather or my wife Ann's going to help you to purchase them. As long as you've got an APO address, we'll ship them overseas to you. They're available if you'd like to look at them. It's a 6-day devotional. Covers our whole life with everything from the day my poor dog Bubbles died to a lot of my running experience and some of the time I had in Congress. But they can help you in the back if you're interested. And Damon's going to put the camp video up again. We have our camps, and it's on our website of Ryun Learning. They come from all over the world if you're interested. Thank you for coming tonight. Toby, back to you.